I'm with my father today, Dr. Dow Pursley, and today we're going to talk about a ministry that my father was a part of and helped begin called the Underground Fish. But before we do that, I'd like to hear some about how you came to faith, went to Vietnam right after you came to faith in Jesus Christ, and then went to this Bible college. And it was at the Bible college that you started the ministry or helped start the ministry. So I think that'd be a good place to start is with Christ and where that began in your life.
Well, Jacob, I was actually a pretty typical California guy. My early life, I spent most of it on the ball field, either football, basketball, or baseball. But then from there, as I got a little bit older, I started making some bad decisions. I surfed almost many times. I would go down and look at the waves and make a decision whether to go to school or whether to surf. So academics weren't really that important to me at that time, and my life just took a turn for the bad. I ran away from home several times, 3 times to be exact. The first time at 13, and the last time I was 15. So things weren't going well with my parents. My parents were really nice people. They did really good things for our family, but I was just a rebellious kid. They were not believers. And so my mother went to a very, very liberal church, and she tried to drag us off to church when we were kids, and that worked until we were probably 11 or 12, and finally we just stopped going. She continued to go. My father didn't go at all. He was working a lot, but he probably wouldn't have gone anyways. He was pretty against the gospel, things like that. So when I turned 15, I met, 16, I met the person I'm married to now, Joanne. So we were in high school together. She was really a good student and really sharp girl, and she just picked a bad guy to date me. And so we dated for nearly 2 years. During that time, I went to a funeral when I was about maybe 18 for 2 different people that I grew up with on my block, and both of them killed in Vietnam. And I really got angry. In fact, I decided I'll join the Marine Corp, and I joined with the idea of just going and killing people over there. They killed my friends. So not a good motivation, not thinking really anything like a Christian. But about 2 weeks before I left to go to boot camp, it was actually a 2-week delay program. You join, wait 2 weeks, and then go to boot camp. And during that time, after the second funeral, a guy confronted me with the fact that he knew my friend Dave, and that he wanted to tell me a little bit about a decision he made before he went to Vietnam. And so I went over and talked to the guy. Actually, 2 old ladies who'd been praying for me for years, 2 of my friends' mothers, they told him that I was in trouble and needed help. So he invited me over, shared the gospel with me. I received Christ that day. Instantly, I knew that I was on the wrong trajectory, but I had been on it for many years by then. So I went back home and I witnessed to your mother. She was 15 years, well, at that time she was 16 years old, almost 17. So that's kind of how my faith journey started. I played football for the Marine Corps for a while during football season, and then right after that, I went to Vietnam, Joanne and I were married on my boot camp leave, and so we had just that little football season to spend a little time together. And I was a very new Christian at that time.
So what year was that?
So that would have been 1967.
Okay.
All right. And so after I was wounded in Vietnam, I ended up.
Mm-hmm. I was just going to ask one question though.
Sure.
So you can't, you met Christ through this man coming to you and saying, I'd like to talk to you about this, and you had these women praying for you, and then you accepted Christ. You were in boot camp. How I was just curious in this part of the story about what helped you grow in faith. I mean, during boot camp, during your time in actually Vietnam in the jungles, and what you were doing there. I mean, you were able to read a Bible? Did you have other Christian friends?
Yeah, actually, the guy who led me to Christ gave me one of those little Secret Service Bibles, a little New Testament, and so to me that was a Bible. That's all. I'd really never read the Bible in my life, and so I started reading through the New Testament. I only had 2 weeks before I was in boot camp, so I really didn't have long to understand much. In fact, I had a little pen light flashlight, and at night, after the lights were out, I would read my New Testament. But even my reading was so pathetic back then, and it was a King James Bible, and so I don't know how much I got out of it, but I got some out of it. I knew I was saved, and I knew life was going to be different, but I didn't know how. So I didn't really have any discipleship because there wasn't time. And when Joanne and I got married during my boot camp leave, we moved up north towards Camp Pendleton, up in Capistrano Beach. And then I was lucky that I got on the Marine Corp football team, and I played football for a season before I went to Vietnam. So I had that time in our new marriage. I had witnessed to Joanne before, right after I received Christ, and but she really didn't start going to church, and neither did I until she went while I was in Vietnam.
Okay.
And she didn't know what church to go to, so she decided to go to a big church in San Diego. The pastor was Tim LaHaye. He had performed our marriage because one of the ladies had been praying for me, said, well, he'll do your marriage. And so we had pre-marriage counseling one time, just one visit, and then he performed our wedding. And so she went to that church while I was in Vietnam.
Makes sense.
So.
Wow. But in Vietnam, did you have any opportunity to read the Bible, or was there any kind of chaplain or anything like that, or was there just no time for that?
There wasn't much time, but I did have my little New Testament with me, and I kept that with me all the time. And anytime I had some time, I would read. And so the guys that I was close to there, I wasn't there long before I got wounded. So the guys that I was close to, they knew that I was a Christian, but they didn't know what that meant much. And I didn't really have the wisdom to know how to even explain it much. So.
Wonderful. So you came to faith, and you were in Vietnam, and what happened after that?
Well, I was newly married. Your mother, I married her when she was 17, and I was just 18. And I met her when she was 15, so that was the longest 2 years of my life. But then when I went to Vietnam, we had very little contact. In fact, we were trying to write letters back and forth, but she was receiving my mail, but I wasn't receiving hers. And so that was a little difficult for a young guy, newly married in Vietnam, and his wife finishing high school. Right. She her junior and senior year while we were married. So then my job basically was an awful job. I called artillery in on the enemy, and so that was probably the worst. When I look back at my life, that was probably the worst part of it, is actually realizing now that I was, involved in 18 and 17-year-olds losing their lives because of the things I had to do. So, but thankfully I wasn't in Vietnam long. I ended up in the hospital ship, and then on Japan, and then transferred to Naval Air Station San Diego Hospital. And so I spent quite a bit of time in the hospital before I got out of the Marine Corps. And I got out in April 1st in 1968. So, or 69, excuse me.
Okay.
All right. So
what happened? So after that, then, I mean, did you immediately move to Michigan? It was Michigan with underground.
Not at all. I reconnected with a friend who just died a year ago, Howard Good.
Oh, yeah.
Howard was a Christian. We were friends since 7th grade, but he had never really shared the gospel with me. And so I didn't know where he was at all. And when I got back from Vietnam, he found out that I had become a Christian. So he hunted me down like the dog I was. And he found me. And he introduced me to a guy named Bill Burnside, who was a professor at John Brown University. He was a history prof there. And that's how I met Bill, and how I met eventually Dr. Wheat. So through Bill. So it's really interesting how life is. You never know kind of what's going on when you're young. You're meeting people, things are happening, but you don't realize the connections that those are going to make later on.
Right. And just for people to know, Dr. Ed Wheat, if you could just say shortly who he was.
Dr. Ed Wheat was a fellow that wrote he was a surgeon who wrote 2 best-selling Christian books. One, Love Life for Every Married Couple, the other one, Intended for Pleasure, and had a medical practice where he did surgery, but he became a Christian at 38 and began to witness to all of his patients and his wife, who was not a Christian at the time. And he was led to Christ by an 80-year-old woman who actually came to his office to have an in-office procedure. He performed that procedure, and on her way out, she walked back into the clinic after God spoke to her in her car. Just inside, she realized God saying, "Go back and witness to that nice young doctor." So if you're 80, 38 is a nice young doctor. So she went back in, and at that time he was eating lunch. He was a brown bagger. He brought his lunch every day. So he was eating his lunch, and she opened the door, took a tract called The Way of Life, put it on his desk, and hightailed it out of there. She didn't say anything to him. He thought, this is such unusual behavior. I think I'll read this. And he read that tract, and he got on his knees right there in his office and received Christ. He had gone to a liberal church all of his life, and here was the gospel. He was confronted with it, just the written gospel, and immediately knew that this was true, and his life changed. And I met Doc years later and started working with him. But
right, and his office was in Northwest Arkansas, specifically Springdale, Arkansas, where you ended up sometime after Michigan, I think. That's correct, right?
Well, quite a bit after.
Quite a bit after that. Okay.
Right.
Well, so anyway, so you met Bill Burnside, and Howard Good introduced you to Bill Burnside, and that's eventually how you met Dr. Ed Wheat. So what happened now in the California time before Michigan?
So what happened is Howard uh, had gone to 1 or 2 years of college, I think 1 year college. And he decided, along with one other fellow, Mike Riker, uh, we all decided we needed some Bible training. We started going to a couple Bible studies that we had heard about, and we did that pretty regularly for a period of a short time, just a couple months. And we decided we needed some training, so we decided to go back to Grand Rapids and go to a little Bible college back there. And you'll remember I said my academics weren't a big thing with me, so I'm way behind the curve on how to study and what you should have known by that time in life. And so when I got back there to that little Bible college, I met a professor who was an English professor there. And after our first exam, after he graded that first exam, the next class, he asked me to stay after class. And so I did. And he said, what have you been doing? Mm-hmm. So I gave him a quick, understanding of what my life had been like. And I said the test didn't come out so well. He said, oh, it's terrible. He said, I don't even want to tell you what grade level your grammar is at. Mm-hmm. He said, but there's no way you're going to make it through this little college even unless you come and live at my house and I teach you everything you should have learned in junior high and high. Mm-hmm. And I said, well, I have a wife and a child. Mm-hmm. And he said, well, bring them. So we moved in with Gordon Pulse. Wow. And he stayed up till 2 or 3 every morning, teaching me everything from English to metaphysics. I mean, he was just an amazing mind. And he was a graduate from the University of Michigan. And so one of the Ivy League schools, a brilliant guy. And he really invested himself in me. Plus, here I was, a new husband with a child, and didn't know anything, and he spent time teaching me. So he mentored me in ways that were amazing. But we realized.
So when you were, so you met Gordon Pools. Now, where were you at that time? Where was that? This was
back in Michigan.
This was in Michigan. Yeah. So you were at a Bible college there in Michigan, and Gordon Pools was your English professor, and then he invited you and my mom and Melissa, your daughter at the time, to come, and that's amazing. That's amazing.
Oh, it is. Yeah. Think about that. I mean, here I was, just this idiot kid from California, and here's this guy who just took us under his wing. And Gordon was an old man. He was like 26. And so, but I had just turned 19. So.
So now, was this right there after Vietnam, after you were discharged in 69? Was that like the fall of 69, maybe?
Well, I actually got discharged, like I said, on July 1st.
Okay.
So it would have been the next school year.
Okay.
So, yeah. So, wow. So I was in. Let's see, was that right? May have been discharged in 68 and July 1st of 68, because by 69 I was there in Grand Rapids.
Okay. Yeah. That makes sense.
And after just a couple months, I lived with Gordon. We were living with him, and during that 2-month period where he was really teaching me things, we began to talk about the downtown area in Grand Rapids. And I began to go into the black area several days a week
Mm.
and people would be sitting on their porches, and I would go up to the porch, and I'd give them a track, and I would witness, and there was one black person at the school where I was going, and somebody told him that I'd been going through the black section, and giving out tracts and witnessing, and he was a little fearful for my life, and I didn't really even think about it, but that was during the time probably around the Watts riots and all the stuff that was going on then. And so he said he took me aside and said, I want to go with you. And so he started going with me, just basically to be there so people wouldn't wonder why this white guy was going up to them and sharing the gospel.
Could I ask a question about that?
Sure.
So when you grew up in San Diego, in the 60s and so forth, and in the 50s, did you see a lot of racial tension or hear that or grow up with that in the San Diego area just as a child or a teenager?
Well, I mean, there was a lot of racial tension, but not where we lived.
That's what I meant. Yeah.
We have one black person where I went to high school in the whole school.
I see.
And so it was it wasn't really something that you saw it on the news here and there, but like I said, Jacob, I wasn't a thinking person at that time. I was a surfing person.
Right.
I wasn't concerned about anybody except me.
I got it. So it's interesting because going to an African American neighborhood at that time. I mean, obviously, your motivation was you want people to know Jesus, and that's what motivated you. You weren't even thinking that I shouldn't be in an area like this, or maybe I'm going to be unwanted, or it's going to be difficult. It's just a different perspective, even back then, and I guess it would have been 1969.
Yeah, it would have been 69. Mm-hmm. And so from there, Gordon and I talked a lot about the downtown area in Grand Rapids. Of course, Gordon grew up in that area, so he knew everything that was going on down there. And Gordon, during the Civil Rights Movement, was a thinker. He actually went down every summer while he was at the University of Michigan. He would go spend his summers at very poor black areas in Mississippi and teach kids all summer long. And so he really mentored and taught kids during the whole civil rights movement. And I think marched with Dr. King down there once or twice. I'm not sure all the details on that, but I know his main involvement was a very active involvement of teaching young people to get their educational level where it should be. So he knew the area of downtown where there were lots and lots of problems. In fact, at that time in South Division Street, where we started the Underground Fish, the Underground Fish was right in the heart of the problem areas down there, just basically prostitution, sodomites roaming the streets, the bar, a lot more bars than churches back then, and just a lot of homeless people, drug addicts, a lot of drug addicts and drunks, and just a mishmash of the problems in society. But we decided that we would go down there and start witnessing to people, and that's the way we started. We actually just going down sharing Christ, and then we decided, when it got cold, we decided about November, it's just too cold to be out on the street, for people to really listen to you. So we decided to rent a storefront building and just have people come in, offer coffee, go out and talk to people, and then bring them back to the building. And so that's the way it started. It was November 3rd when we first got the building. We had prayed a lot about where to. Well, we knew we wanted to be on South Division, but we didn't know if we could afford anything. We didn't really have any money at all. When, in fact, the rent was only $125. I have right up here in my office the first receipt of the underground fish, and that was November the 3rd, 1969.
So this was November 3rd. You rented this place out. It was getting cold. You wanted to have a place to minister to the people that you felt called to reach at that time. That's an amazing story.